Okay, Brian. Hi. So here's how I
Yeah,
want to here's how I'm going to start this conversation. Now that it's been a couple of months since your book came out, I've had people say I've had people ask me a lot for book recommendations. So now, if someone says to me, "Gio, if I could only ever buy one book that will have the biggest impact on my life, what would that book be?" And it would be this one, Areté. And
oh,
I'm
bless you,
not
brother.
I'm not kissing your butt. It is unbelievable. It is incredible. And I want to, we're going to have a fun conversation as if we're out for dinner kind of thing. And I want to ask things that I haven't asked you before. And let's start with someone who may not have ever met you before. So my first question is, how would you introduce yourself today?
That's a very good question. As I hear my two kids playing in the background, I'm the father of a very couple of energized kids, 11-year-old Emerson, almost 7-year-old Eleanor, married to my best friend Alexandra. And I'm the founder, CEO, the philosopher behind Heroic Public Benefit Corporation. Spent half of the last 25 years of my life as a founder CEO, building and selling to social platforms before Facebook, and the other half as a philosopher, reading, writing, thinking, teaching, repeating, and integrating those two kind of personas, the philosopher, the CEO, is what I'm all about. And then my tattoos are kind of the easiest way. I like to go when I'm meeting people, or I'm at Whole Foods, and I see a tattoo. I always go to the tattoos. I'm like, hey, that's a really beautiful tattoo. What does that mean for you? And I find that to be one of the most intimately quick ways to connect. So my two tattoos, principal tattoos, are Arete and Heroic. And that's that's kind of the summation of my life. Arete, living with virtue, being your best self so you can be heroic. But that's now a long answer to your short question and kind of how I'd arrive at that. And now I feel like, all right, well, who are you? Like, I got to ask the same question, but you go where you want to go.
Well, here's I can't remember if I've ever told you this. I've had this realization lately or recently that my favorite relationships and friendships, especially, are people where we're each other's hero.
Hmm.
And I see that I have that with you and even mutual friends of ours. And I love that because you asked me once, I think you were interviewing me, who are your heroes? And after that, it struck me that everyone, like I surround myself with heroic
Hmm.
people, and I surround myself with people I admire, and there's a mutual admiration, and
Hmm.
it's like a synergistic relationship that happens. Same with my kids, same with my wife. It's so cool. And I'm saying that because I know that there are people even joining us today live or watching this video who look up to you and say, Brian's my hero. And I'm curious, now that we're at where we're at, if we reversed the time clock or took um, a spaceship or some kind of DeLorean, that's the word. We drove in our DeLorean back to
Back to the
1985.
Future, baby. Yeah, we grew up in the 80s and 90s. Let's go back to the future.
How has Brian Johnson's identity evolved from the one I'm speaking with in this moment to the one that was around in 1985 that I wish I knew back then, so that I would knock on your door every day and say, hey, can we go out and play? But how has the identity of Brian evolved over that time?
Yeah. Well, first, what's Peggett? So I would have been 11. How old would you have been again?
10. No,
Okay,
wait,
cool. So we
nine.
kind of,
Sorry, nine. 1985, nine.
okay, yeah, awesome. So I'm turning 50 in 4 months. That's a milestone. A whole nother conversation. But between 11 and almost 50, integration is the word that comes to mind for me. But 11 years old, man. I mean, I was youngest of five kids, as you know, lower middle class, family, blue collar family. Dad worked in the grocery store. I was scared of everything at 11. I mean, literally just terrified. Sweet kid and happy in quotes. But also just scared. And just kind of afraid of a lot of things. Um, And but yet still had an intensity about me, unformed and kind of raw and naive. And I think that's been the big process for me, is just this understanding more and more about life. I've always been passionate about what makes these heroes on my wall heroic. The same reason, you know, why we connect is you feeling your own kind of not really quite fitting in,
Right.
yet knowing that there was something more that you were going to bring to the world, and let's go. But integration comes to mind, you know, and really working hard to try to understand what it looks like and what it means to live a good, noble, heroic life. And God and I made a deal about 25 years ago that I'd be able to create a life in which I got paid to study these ideas to the extent I gave back. And I had to give back, you know, and I get goosebumps and tears in my eyes. Like, that literally was a deal that we made. And so that feels like that's who I am. And I feel like I'm just getting going, you know. I figured out a few things and it's like, oh, okay, now it's getting fun. Like, what can we do and what impact can we make? And that's a very long non-answer to your question, but that's what arises for me.
Well, is there anything that 1985 Brian would get in trouble for?
You know what's funny is that 1985 Brian, I end my book, the third to last chapter, and you know there's 451 micro chapters, is my mom sternly reprimanding me for one of probably less than 5 times in my life. I was the perfect little kid, you know, youngest of five in a family with a father who struggled with alcohol, kind of that perfect dysfunctional, I'm the golden child. But it was 11 years old when I did something that upset her. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a rare occurrence, and she was fiercely upset with me. And my mom, never, you know, devout Catholic woman, but she grabbed me by the shoulders and she shook me and throttled me and said, God gave you gifts and you must give them to the world. You know, that's the third to last chapter in my book. And that's my life. I mean, literally, that is my life story, is boom. I feel the truth in that for me. I feel the truth in that for you. I feel the truth in that for everyone who's here today that I'm blessed to serve in our community. You know, and that reaching through Zoom and grabbing you by the shoulders and looking you straight in the eye and saying, God gave you gifts, however you want to define that, and you must give them to the world. That's literally my life story. And funny that that should have happened in 1985, maybe 84, but literally right there.
I asked the question because I have a theory and I want to get your uh, philosophical mastery take on this theory, which is we are born perfectly ourselves and there's no filter. And you know, you have children too, so you've probably seen this, especially in the first 5, 7, or maybe 10 years of our lives. And as we grow up, we're completely dependent on the adults around us to shape our reality, to tell us things, to keep us safe, all those things. And part of that is programming in our limbic or reptilian or animal parts of our brain that is there for survival, where it's telling us to fit in. Because 10,000 years ago, or whenever we were very tribal, if we weren't in the tribe, a tiger would eat us. So we need to fit in. We need to be a part of the group. And the messaging from our parents is to stop doing the things that make us stand out so that we fit in. Or not just parents, teachers and adults around us. And yet we have this intrinsic need to stand out, or not even stand out, to be ourselves, which makes us stand out. And often those are the things that we might get in trouble for, or might be told to stop doing. You know, for me, it was stop daydreaming, get your head out of the clouds. That was a lot of the messaging back then. And now when I reverse engineer the pattern, it's those things that are my gifts that I can give to the world. Those things that, if I harness those gifts, become superpowers, which I have done. You know, daydreaming as big as possible, connection, bringing people together, all of the things that I've, and to your point, monetizing yourself, like monetizing your gifts so that you can make the biggest impact and an income and a living is the coolest thing ever. Because it's so rewarding and fulfilling in every way. So I'm curious your take on the standing out versus fitting in as a child that leads to figuring out or reverse engineering what those gifts could be.
Yeah, again, complex, nuanced question. My mom in particular, but both my mom and my dad were such hyper conformists, and I love my mom, and she's just a wonderful, beautiful human being. But fitting in was absolutely essential for her. And I don't know if I think I was just so needed to be that perfect little kid that it but I did the things that a perfect kid should do. So I actually wasn't stifled per se. I was, you know, the smartest kid in the class and did all this and did that. I hustled and I worked hard on the baseball team. So the things that I happened to do naturally were rewarded by society, so that worked. But there was like this goosebumps, like, and that's what you do, you know. And if you just follow the rules, you'll get into heaven. Was what we, you know, that story in our family. You go to church, you do this, you dress this way, you act this way, you're all of these things, which frankly are important to be able to fit into a society, but just remarkably I don't want to say overdone, but done at the highest possible level. So then for me, and I there was some moments punctuated in my childhood where I was starting to think for myself, you know,
Right.
that ability to think for myself, that ability to actually not conform, is why I have Ralph Waldo Emerson up on my wall over here, and why we named our son Emerson. His essay Self-Reliance is basically his ode to not that. So trust thyself, he says. You know, every heart vibrates to that iron string. For nonconformity, society will whip you with its displeasure. So as I started, and I first generation college student, UCLA, you know, and then biggest professional services firm in the world. I left that to go to a top 10 law school. And it wasn't until then that I started actually saying, I don't want any of that. So it literally took me 22, 23 years of really good conformity with a few little wobbly moments, but very good conformity, Phi Beta Kappa, all the things you do to show people that you've got it together. Then I shattered all of that, as you know, when I dropped out of law school. But I was incredibly good at performing in the conforming role until about 23 years old. And then it was like learning a whole new language and a whole new way of being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And did you have any kryptonite back then?
I think it's just perfectionism, you know, and I grew up in a fixed mindset family. I mean, I literally couldn't make mistakes. I'd get straight A's and all this, and I'd get a satisfaction in conduct, and that's all my dad wanted to talk. I mean, it was like, I'm 50, that was 40 years ago, and I remember it like it was last night.
Right.
You know, I bring home the report card, literally straight A's, outstanding and everything, but I got one satisfaction in conduct, and that's all he wants to talk about. It's ridiculous to say it out loud, but like
Yeah.
literally that's one of my most poignant memories of my childhood. So I think my kryptonite was the story that it's not okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to ever be anything other than perfect. And
Yeah.
if you aren't, then something's wrong with you, which led to me thinking about wanting to end my own life. I was so locked into that when I dropped out of law school, I couldn't see how I could bring the same intensity I have now that wasn't integrated and grounded yet, but I couldn't see how I would ever bring that into, you know, the normal world, if you will, and the world I was told to live in. So that my kryptonite ultimately was perfectionism, fixed mindset, and then the story that it was just me, that nobody else was experiencing the things I was experiencing, and that must mean that I am fundamentally flawed and I'm never going to figure it out. That was unquestionably, I'm sure I can come up with more kryptonites, but the fundamental kryptonite, that's become the core of my work, you know? So now it's, all right, well, I know what that feels like. I know what this feels like. I have a decent idea of what I did to go from there to here. Here's what ancient wisdom, modern science has to say. And again, the hero's pain becomes their gift, you know? And I know that this is your life story, you know, 101. But again, that's kind of what arises for me. Great question.
There's so much overlap in our stories. It's wild. You know, I had the same experience of getting a 97% on a test, and the first thing is, what happened to that other 3%? That's so. What's wrong with you? Like, oh, okay.
Bad day. Sorry, I don't know.
You part of your journey, and this blows my mind, and I want to learn more, is you traveled a lot and explored in your philosopher days. And where did you go to learn and study from maybe ancient masters and philosophers. What countries, cities did you go to?
Yeah. So then I'm going to frame that question up with one more kind of impetus, which was getting paid to do what I love to do. I read a book called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, and I got
Ooh.
rid of all of my journals but one. And I kept this journal that I kept after selling my first business, in which I did an exercise that he has. You ask yourself 100 questions, and then he has you reflect on a power question. And the power question I chose was, how can I get paid to do what I love to do? I'm 25, 26 years old at the time. I had enough to take a few years off after selling my first business. Anyway, that was when I had the epiphany of, I want to get paid to figure out how I can live an optimal life and help others do the same, and all the things we discussed. Then I went on a trip. And on that trip, I studied Socrates in Athens. I literally read, the Apology in the Port of Piraeus in Athens. Studied Jesus in Jerusalem, studied Rumi in Konya, Turkey, where he's buried, studied Marcus Aurelius near the Danube of Hungary, in Austria, near where he wrote Meditations. And that just became kind of my obsession, is studying all these great teachers, and was blessed to be able to study a few of them, in their homeland, if you will.
That is on its own one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. And I love that it wasn't just I want to study these people. You went to them, or where they were from, or where they lived at the time of their uh, either success or philosophy or writing or what art or whatever it was. I love that. What was the book? How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci?
Yeah, How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. Michael Gelb just had this great reflection exercise. Curiosity was one of da Vinci's virtues, of course. So that was one of the exercises that catalyzed, literally changed my life.
Okay, you mentioned Jesus in that list, and I need to know the pattern you see between Jesus and King Leonidas, because I know they're
Yeah, so
both heroes to
that's
you.
well, this is actually from a conversation I had with another one of my dear friends. And it's funny because I connected with him on this conversation shortly after you and I had a similar chat. And so his name is Mark Devine, Navy SEAL commander, former Navy SEAL commander, best-selling author, entrepreneur, all these other things. But as you know, I like to ask people, who are your two favorite heroes? And he says, and this again, he's 6'4", 240 or whatever he is, just a house of a guy, who's also incredibly spiritual. And he says, well, my two favorite heroes are King Leonidas. And you nod your head, you're like, yeah, if there's a guy that's going to embody King Leonidas, it's this guy, a warrior who knowingly took himself and 300 of his warriors to their certain death to protect our freedoms. I mean, Western civilization, we can thank King Leonidas for doing what he did to slow down that invasion, etc. And then he says, and then Jesus, and Jesus sacrificed himself for, you could say, all of humanity, and it was a spiritual warrior, just as strong and in the spiritual world as Leonidas was in the material. Yeah, those are my two favorite heroes. And it was one of those moments that he is like literally the embodiment of them. So I admire Leonidas. I have Jesus up on my wall as a reminder of my upbringing, and for me, the representation of just that pure, fierce love. But yeah, that was his reflection back, and just affirmed my intuition that one of the best ways to know someone outside of their tattoos, ask them who their heroes are, because
Right.
I believe that we are, in many ways, the expression of our two favorite heroes, or our aspirational best self is the integration of those two favorite heroes. For me, it's Epictetus and Aurelius, my favorite teacher, my favorite leader. Intensity, humility, willingness to play our roles well, and the Stoic philosophy behind them, etc.
Well, what do you mean? Or you often use the phrase day one, or I think you use it every day. Uh, what does day one mean? And then what does +1 mean?
It's great. Yeah, literally every day I take a picture of my two tattoos. I get my heart rate up 101 beats higher than my lowest. When I start my day, I meditate and I get my heart rate down as low as I can. Right. And so I want to be as tranquil as I can be, connected to my best self. And then I get it up at least 101 beats up. So I was 42 resting heart rate this morning, and then I got it up way past
42.
143,
Wow.
you know? Um, a whole nother chat on that. But you know, that's kind of where I play when I'm well rested and well resourced and all the other things. But anyway, I take a picture of that every morning. I take a picture of this forearm, then I take a picture of this forearm, and then I say, day one, all in, let's go. Day one for me, you know, Bezos is actually the one, you know, who introduced me to the idea. Every single shareholder letter that he wrote from the first year through his retirement started with, it's still day one at Amazon. That was the scope of his vision. Didn't matter how big they were. They hadn't done anything yet. They were just getting warmed up. It's day one. And then I also have an affinity for those protecting our freedoms in the military, particularly our special forces operators and the Navy SEALs. Was blessed to do some work with the SEALs and get a tour of their facilities years ago. And I got the card that they get after they go through Hell Week and become a SEAL. And on the front of the card, it says, earn your trident. Every day for the SEAL is day one. They need to show up and they need to be ready. You never know when life is going to challenge you, when you're going to be called to be a protector, which is what it means to be a hero. So for me, that's the attitude. I want to be worthy of being here with you, and people are listening to us talk. I don't take that for granted. Like, I want to be worthy of hopefully embodying some wisdom and discipline and love and courage and arete to be in this position. And to me, that's not a once in a while thing. It's not a when I feel like a thing. It's every day. So that's what I think about when I think of day one. Today's the day to show up, and then it's let's go.
Right.
Palpable urgency, balancing the energy with the tranquility. But this isn't a dress rehearsal, you know. And I'm not talking manicky fly away energy, but stay grounded. But make today a truly great day.
And plus one.
Then the plus one is it's just the frame we use for the daily content. So I'm all about consistency. So to me, consistency is the mark of the master. So a lot of people do things when they feel like it or after they're inspired. That's fine. But the professional is the one who focuses on, and the master is the one who does the most basic, simple things, and they try to get a little better day in and day out. So plus one, plus one, plus one. And if you aggregate and compound those tiny little gains over an extended period of time, your potential is unknowable, literally. And so that plus one versus minus one, minus one, minus one. And then I frame it up. Maslow as well said, in any given moment, Abraham Maslow, you have a choice: step forward into growth or back into safety. Forward into growth, back into safety. I call that plus one, minus one, plus one, minus one. Now, the difference in any moment between stepping forward and back isn't one unit, it's two. Because if you could have gone plus one and you went minus one, you lost 2 units. And if all day you're going the wrong direction, it's at the end of the days in which you didn't step forward and plus one that you want to numb yourself. So that's kind of the plus one, a few reasons why I like that.
What one thing that I focused on in 2023 that I think had a huge impact for me, and I want to share with everyone here with us, is the notion of being comfortable with discomfort. And you mentioned the plus one is growth, and that often or usually happens outside of our comfort zone or in an area that might create anxiety or a bit of fear response or excitement. And I figured, okay, if that's the case, if I'm always thinking, how do I make things efficient? If I actually get okay with discomfort, that's the hack to do anything new, because it makes the new thing easier. So then I thought, well, how do I proactively practice discomfort in a way that doesn't feel like I'm jumping out of a plane? And one example, we last year got a cold plunge for the house. And for those of us who don't know what that is, it's like a bathtub with engineered cold water or ice water. So, and it's super healthy in different ways. And you're only in there for a few minutes. We can do 10 to 12 minutes now, my wife and I. And what I learned was that it sucks. When you first start it, it's because it's painful or the cold is painful, until you realize it's not, actually doesn't suck that much. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Like every skill, everything, the more you do something, the easier it becomes, to the point where I'm immune to cold. It's in Toronto today, over the past few weeks, it's been minus 10 to 15 Celsius, which is like, I think it was 8 degrees Fahrenheit kind of thing. And I'm out in this t-shirt I don't wear a coat, I don't wear a sweater. People think I'm insane, and that's my tattoo, my version of it's me knowing I'm cool with. I mean, that nice pun. I'm cool with discomfort, and then I think, well, if I can do that, where else can I apply this to other areas where I might be hesitating or procrastinating or holding back uh, because of the subconscious fear of the discomfort. And now I'm so good with discomfort. And I'm curious if you've had a practice or a way of getting better with discomfort so that the growth happens easier.
Well, I have goosebumps as you described that. It's funny, before you went to, and we have a cold plunge, I'm like, dude, you're making me want to jump in our cold plunge. So we've got a cold plunge as well. And that is one of my practices as well. God bless you all for staying in for 10 to 12 minutes. That's one way to do it. But the benefits are so great. And then intellectually, this frame has changed my life as well. And so the way I frame it up is, all right, and my coach, Phil Stutz, as you know, is the one who, he's my coach, and he's the one who helped me frame this up concretely. So he says, my adaptation of what he says is your infinite potential exists outside of your comfort zone. How does it feel when you exit your comfort zone? By definition, it feels uncomfortable. Now, most people, when they feel uncomfortable, myself included, when I'm not practicing these things, I don't like it. I don't like feeling the pain, the uncertainty, the overwhelm, the anxiety of exiting my comfort zone. But then I want to remind myself that my infinite potential exists outside of my comfort zone. And then I want to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable, to your point.
Right.
And then the hack that I use is every single time I feel this is bring it on. I want this. I want to lean in. And then I do the things that you're describing of training in cold weather, getting in the cold plunge, and finding those little moments of you don't want to do it, but you do it. And that, shift from wanting to avoid the things that make you feel uncomfortable to approaching them is one of the hallmarks of healthy, happy, let alone heroic human beings. So yeah, that's an intellectual frame that has changed my life, especially as a guy that was terrified of everything. There's that systematic desensitization, whether it's the cold or hard conversations or negotiations or whatever, that it's exciting. And then you realize, oh my gosh, when I do that, I'm afraid of one less thing, and then, oh, I'm afraid of another. Wow, what if I actually just did this all the time? And that's what I was saying too with turning 50. I'm like, I'm just figuring out this stuff, like what can happen when you take the foot off the brakes, and you actually start living a little.
The way I define all of this is through the lens of producing a film. So I make movies. They've been documentaries, however, and I'm going to create an open loop for you. Currently working on a fiction film that will be part of our summit, Archangel Summit event that you're speaking at, which I'll talk about in a second. So if you think of any, like I love Christopher Nolan, who's a big director, films like Dark Knight and Interstellar. And when you're making a movie like that, you at the beginning, you think, what is the story arc? Who are the characters? What's the character development? And I see the idea of getting uncomfortable personally as character development, as if I'm writing a script of a blockbuster film, which is my life. Mm-hmm. And I see, there's the phrase out of character. So I think part of the challenge we all face is we build these programs into our consciousness, these routines and rituals and habits that become identity, and then we feel safe in the identity. So if an activity needs to happen or behavior that's out of character, it becomes harder. But if you see yourself as the screenwriter and the director, not just the hero of the story,
and the star, yeah, exactly,
right? you take a step back and you think, well, let's change the script. Let's actually change the character development and practice being out of character. And that again, that's a recent thing for me too. That was all last year, thinking how do I be out of character for myself, so that a behavior that maybe isn't serving me can change, because it doesn't feel like there's the awkwardness of the transition or the behavior change, but then I'm creating a new identity. And I love this. So have you, I know you have, but tell me more about how you think about identity transformation.
When I love your frame on it too, just that identity architecture and just recreating it, etc. So a guy named Richard Wiseman, who has to have the coolest last name ever for what he does. He's like the public philosopher in the UK or something to that effect. He wrote a book called The As If Principle, in which he talks about William James's idea that you need to essentially create a new identity and act as if you were that best version of yourself. And a little bit more sophisticated than fake it till you make it, like actually architecting an identity and living from that identity, right? And again, identity means repeated beingness, as you know. So you got to know who you are at your best and then repeatedly be that. And I love your idea of a screenwriter, director, star coming together and saying, no, this character isn't the one that anyone's going to watch a movie on. Who
Right.
do we need to be? And he says in his great book that you need to put the old you on permanent vacation, 24 hours a day. Act like that new best version of yourself and act as if the old version of you went on vacation to get that new self-image, that new identity reprogrammed. But then, I did an interview like this. Well, this is an interview, it's more of a chat, but with Lanny Basham, one of the world's leading mental toughness guys, Olympic gold medalist, etc. He says you will never outperform a poor self-image. And the difference between the very good and the truly great is their self-image. And just relentlessly creating a self-image, goosebumps again, through your impressions you're making in your mental focus and in the behaviors you're engaging in. And that's the difference between, pretty good and truly great. And then the dominant, he says, they just live in a different realm.
I want to, can we just crush that phrase, fake it till you make it? Like, let's actually analyze it for a second. So my wife and I want to learn how to salsa dance. And it's actually been a dream of hers for her whole life. And so we've started taking classes. I don't approach that class thinking I need to fake this until I make it. I need to pretend I'm an amazing salsa dancer until I am one. It's no, I'm going to learn the skill of salsa dancing and make it a practice. And it's skill acquisition. And anytime someone says fake it till you make it, like what if we reframe that as skill acquisition to any skill? Like if it's easy to think about in terms of a sport or a hobby or those kinds of things. And for those of us that are entrepreneurial or anybody, whatever you do in exchange for money, there's skill acquisition involved. And instead of saying I'm going to fake it till I make it, it's how do I constantly get better? How do I plus one every day with this skill to, further my path or become the best version of this, but not think of it as fake. The self-image thing, I think people use phrases like imposter syndrome or all of these things, but it's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves that's worse than the actual thing itself. And we're so worried.
Let's go there.
We're worried about what other people think, but no one's thinking about us. They're worried about what themselves. So
Let's bring in another mutual friend. Todd Herman comes to mind. So he makes the great distinction in the alter ego effect, which is essentially a book on your identity, self-image, alter ego. You made me think of this when you said the fake it. So then think of Superman, right? And who is the real character? Was it Superman or was it Clark Kent? Because he was actually faking it when he was being Clark Kent. Right. So the reality is the little you that you're showing up as today that you think is the real you is actually the fake you. So the true self with a capital S, capital E, capital L, capital F that is connected to your best self, your daimon, as the Greeks would say, is the super version of you, So quit faking it. You got more power than you think. So just a playful frame there. And then to your point, which is beautiful, it's skill acquisition. So if you lack skill in any domain, whether it's changing certain behaviors or rewiring your consciousness such that you feel an integrity with this identity as a dancer or whatever it is for you, perfect. Know what you want, know the price you're going to need to pay, and then go get to work paying it. And every time you feel, why did I do this? And I don't feel like doing it, the fear, the laziness is coming in. Perfect. Say, bring it on. Heroes feel that, and then they use it as fuel to do the things that allow them to be the expression of their best selves. It's a really cool frame. And I'm already thinking, by the way, how can I make this a +1? Or the daily little, bits of wisdom I do. I'm like, all right, what's this one going to turn out to be? So I love it.
Love it. We have some people joining us live who have questions. We'll get to them in 2 minutes. And if you have a question for Brian or myself, type it in the chat here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I do one of these backstage events for free once a month with someone who's speaking at our Archangel Summit big event in the fall in Toronto. And I want to tease you, right? So for anyone who's attended our events in the past, there's usually thousands of people, and they're an amazing production, and we're known for our events, and more importantly for our attendees, because everyone who shows up is someone who's a leader, who wants to change the world in some way, who often entrepreneurial and has a giant heart, a servant's heart, wants to do big things to impact a lot of people. And there's always performance, there's always a show element, but I wanted to exponentially up level the show so much that people will talk about this event for years. So I just brought on an incredible film director, cinematographer, an Emmy-nominated screenwriter who wrote for the X-Men animated series, because we're producing a film that will play throughout the event, but then comes to life on stage. So imagine if Christopher Nolan designed a personal transformation event. And interacts with the audience, and then the speakers, including yourself, are part of the story arc, and the attendees leave transformed. I actually have a meeting with the screenplay team after this session, and but the film will be Hollywood quality fiction movie. So that's what's
Dude, let's go. Oh my goodness, goosebumps again. I'm like, where's my popcorn? If I ate it, I'd be ready for the weekend. Let's go. That's awesome.
And then even with our tech team and production of what's happening on stage, like I know people attending are going to leave thinking, what just happened? That was insane. And then everyone I know who's a speaker is going to say, can I speak at next year's event? Just because they want to be a part of this thing that we're doing. So I'm excited. I'm not even going to tell you too much because I want you to.
I love it, dude. Yeah, your enthusiasm more than anything else, that creative, effervescent giggle. That's always a good time for me. It's the Joseph Campbellian bliss. It's like, oh, that's it right there. Pay attention to that. Anytime I come up with an idea that's so perfectly audacious, that it literally makes me kind of giggle and chuckle. I'm like, that's it. Go make that happen at the highest possible level. So I just love the felt sense of enthusiasm, the divine within coming through, and I can't wait to experience it. And love it, man. That's so cool.
Thank you. So I'll include the link to get tickets with the replay for Summit. And we have some questions here. One from Ruben. Using Dr. Stutz's shadow, what are some of the daily shadows that seem to persist daily?
Everyone wants to go to the hardest things, the shadow of the most abstract. And I had a great chat yesterday. It's like, I find that my shadow rears its head a lot less often, a lot less frequently, and a lot less intensely when I control my controllables: eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, focusing my mind. Now, if I'm not doing those things, that's when the shadow tends to rear its head. But I don't try to address the shadow. I try to address the things that lead to the shadow showing up more consistently. Because it's a lot easier for me to decide I'm going to eat a certain way, move my body a certain way, turn off my electronics, and be in bed for a certain amount of time, focus my mind, via meditation and other work I do, than it is to solve the, in many ways, unsolvable, traumas and all these other things. So that's a non-answer to the question on one level, but I think the ultimate answer is when we ground ourselves, when we, as we say, activate our soul force, as Phil would say. Phil's number one thing isn't that. Phil's number one thing is get your life force dialed in. Focus on brain hygiene, eating, moving, sleeping, and then you're able to see the shadow and integrate it in a much more powerful way. But if we plotted the number of times I experience, intense shadow stuff in anyone here, it will almost perfectly be correlated to how well resourced you are energetically. I'd be willing to make that bet at a very high number, and I'm not a gambling guy. And therefore, if I want to solve that, then I solve it at its root cause,
Right.
not trying to figure it out around the edges. But anyway, so then I use my shadow rearing its head as an opportunity to step back and do what I just described. What am I doing that's making that more present? And let me change that. And then literally next day, boom, different consciousness, let's go. I don't spend a whole lot of time coming up here. I come back to the root cause as I see it, and then go there. And there's a longer chat on that, but that's kind of my playful, hyper practical take on it. Bless you, Ruben.
And in case you wanted an easy question, Patrick is asking, what is one big thing you think our society has gotten most wrong? And do you have ideas of how to change it?
This is Patrick. Patrick, I wish I could see you. Bless you. Let's go. So my obsession is at the individual level. So I think our culture has had the same challenge for 2,500 years. If you look at all ancient wisdom traditions, and modern science will affirm, we face 2,500-year-old challenges that are amplified to the nth degree in our modern worlds. But that challenge is the battle between the best within us and the less than awesome, following the daimon, the guiding spirit, or the demon, which is the diminutive of the daimon. What I think society got wrong at the most potentially catastrophic level is not making that more clear. So we've all been seduced to go after the fame, the wealth, and the hotness. We chase that. We experience success. We get to the top of the first mountain, to use David Brooks's metaphor. And we look around, we're like, this is it? So I think we got to know the ultimate game of life, which is to be your best self, show up, live with Areté, win that inner battle. And again, long non-answer to the question, but it's vice versus virtue. I look at all the challenges that we're facing in the world, all of them, from chronic disease to chronic mental health issues to political polarization to environmental degradation. At its core, it's an expression of viciousness, but then at its core, it's each of us individually doing the hard work to show up to be the best, most virtuous, most noble, most heroic version of ourselves. And when we do that, and only if we do that at the highest, most heroic levels, will we conquer those challenges. Yeah, thanks for the easy question, Patrick and Gio. That's great.
Well, I let me try to tackle this one too. There's a word that I don't like, and I love, how much I love etymology and language. And when I say I don't like it, it's because of what it does. And the word is them, THEM. And often, like, I think the thing we've gotten wrong is the assumption that there's such a thing as them, meaning those people that are different than us people. And that's usually the cause of conflict in a major way. And for what I've uncovered, discovered, is we are all essentially connected. There's the identity version of each of us as individuals that is the story that gets evolved over time. There's and this might get a little woo or spiritual, but there's the I, or the I am, behind all of that to me is all of us at the same time. And even though we are distinctly unique and different, and there are patterns that shape us together. So, my parents were born in Italy, so I feel I can call myself Italian. There's labels and labels we share with other people, but it's when our label is better than your label, or my label is different than them, that concept causes so many problems that don't need to be there. And my personal practice for this is, if that ever bubbles up, I want to know them, to delete that word where I am them. So there's no more them. It's us. Even if I feel like they're the opposite of me, even people who frustrate the crap out of me, those are the ones I want to love the most. It's like, what is it? What's happening there? Because if I can delete the them, there's peace. But more importantly, I think it's an internal thing first. I actually shared a post this morning. I was just writing the idea that peace is our operating system. Peace and happiness, the things we think we have to go out and find, are what we're born with, and what's the foundation of everything. And everything else that we feel, those fears and all these things, are the story labeled or plastered on top of that. But we all have access to the things we're looking out there for. We all have access to here. And then that part that we have access to is connected to all of us. That's how I feel about the thing we may have gotten wrong.
No, dude, this is so good. And then it's interesting because I believe that the way to be in a position through which we can dissolve that apparent dichotomy between me and you and them and us and all this is the basic fundamentals. It's to live with virtue, to live with Arete, to be your best self, have the humility to do the hard work today, such that you are purifying your consciousness, such that you're through basic fundamentals. Again, I'm not talking about go on a 10-day silent meditation retreat and think that's it. It's day in and day out doing the things that allow you to connect to your best self. Then there's this natural flowering of the spiritual awareness that you're talking about that I think people try to bypass, whether it's through certain trips or retreats, and they get this state experience of what you're talking about. But then they come back and there's no integration. There's no true mastery of the practice of reconnecting to that spirit, from which what you're talking about is it just is, you know what I mean? It's a powerful thing. But then we get out of the abstract to the concrete, and we're back in the, well, how are you doing? You know, and are you doing the little things to stay plugged in? Because I sure as heck am a better husband and father and leader when I'm taking care of myself on the most basic fundamental level. And the other things that are really hard to solve become a lot less intense, less frequent, etc.
I loved your phrase earlier, control the controllables.
Dude, you want to get everybody an extra hour of sleep tonight, you know?
Right.
Let's see how you show up when you get your recommended 7 hours of true sleep. I'm a different person. I mean, the sleep debt we face culturally, my goodness, there's a mistake society made. Wow, lights are cool, aren't they? But wow, millions of years of evolution gone in the last, 110 years. It's like, all right, good luck with that, right?
In your home, you turn the lights off.
Dude, I went to bed at 7:15 last night. The sun set at 5:30. Winter here in Austin. Perfect. Hour and a half later. Look, 150 years ago, even 200 years ago, what are you doing? You're burning some candles, read some books. All right. You go back, 15,000 years. You're sitting around a fire. Congratulations. Yes, we turn off the lights at night. We don't have anything but red lights on at night. We don't want to create a day during the night. My kids at 3 years old could tell you that bright lights disrupts your melatonin. It's going to make it more difficult to get a good night of sleep. These are not complex ideas. Blue light only existed from the sun until incredibly recently. So you don't take millions of years of evolution, last 100 years, and punctuate it over the last 10, and then think you're going to disrupt that and function at a high level, which is why 80% of us are struggling with some form of mental health challenge, and about that many are struggling with obesity or some chronic disease or another. And these things are solved through very unsexy, mundane, basic, be a good animal, good human being practices.
It's so evident once you do it. And sometimes I think we don't realize that we're not doing it, or we don't realize how our current rituals or habits may have a negative effect until you experience the contrast.
Yep.
Right? Sleep.
Then you got to make the connection. And this
Yeah.
is what I was talking about with the shadow. So even my son, his shadow will come up. Now, do I need to archaeologically analyze my 11-year-old son's shadow? Or do I need to point out the fact to him, he just got an Oura ring, that if he eats late and goes to bed a little later, he gets less deep sleep and his readiness score is impacted and he's a little crankier. So I'm constantly making the connection between the most mundane things and how they impact, things that you may not make the connection. But when you start doing that, it gets exciting. And then these behaviors aren't chores. They're gifts this version of ourselves are giving to our future version of ourselves. And again, it becomes fun. It becomes just a game, that takes on a deeper meaning, of a deeper sense of joy, and that effervescence that you had of, oh my God, this is the event I'm going to do. That's so good. But that's a function of you for decades
Right.
striving to be your best heroic self, and punctuated with you were doing it unconsciously, of course, embracing the discomfort in order to be who you are. But to do it even more concretely, then you can take even more creative risks and have the audacity and the confidence to say what you just said. I mean, that's so exciting to witness, and then to model, and then to create concrete tools to help people do it in their own idiosyncratic way.
Do you, how do you approach goal setting in the long term? My original question was going to be, do you set like 10-year goals or 25 or
Dude,
what's your,
you know me, I tattoo. Let's go back to the arm. I've got a 30-year goal tattooed to my arm, and I experiment with it a lot, and kind of focus it up. But that's my goal. So my life mission is 51% of humanity flourishing by 2051. This doesn't come off, so heroic isn't let me build a business I'm going to flip in 3 years, and then I'm going to go retire and do all this stuff. I've made the choice to come back from Bali, literally, and try to create a life of meaning and purpose. But I run everything through that. And then I break it down 2030. I like that 7-year arc. So I'm looking forward to 2030. And then I pull it all the way back to, all right, 2024. What do I want to see in 2024? And then I bring that back, obviously breaking it down quarter, in some next initiatives, and maintaining that structure and opportunistic thing. But then it's today. So can I make today a masterpiece? And then most importantly, what we do with our team is I want to activate my soul force. I want to get myself as energized as I can be, because then I'm not doing my job. That best version of me is coming through. That version of me, the Greeks called it your daimon. The Romans called your guiding spirit your genius. So we adapted that to he's a genius. But back in the day, everyone had a genius.
right?
Everyone had a guiding spirit. So the Stephen Pressfields, the Elizabeth Gilberts, they tell us your job is just to create the environment such that your genius, your daimon, can come through. Everything that we've done that's worth talking about, we didn't do it. We did the job to make sure that version of us can come through. And now that's all I try to do, is help that version come through. That's what we do try to do with our team and with the people we serve and our coaches we train, et cetera. Getting me fired up. But anyway.
It blew my mind when, so I should tell you this, every day I'm looking up a word on etymology online, because
Of course you are.
and I
Send it
remember
to
when
me, by the way. Send me a grab and text me up with
I
the
will.
word that we studied this morning. I would appreciate that. I've never
I will
gotten
do
into it,
that.
but I'll do the geo word of the day.
Done. But I distinctly remember the word genius when I looked it up, thinking it meant high IQ or smart, intelligent, which is the current definition, but the guiding, almost like having a guardian angel thing. That was, I love that. So
Yeah, but that's the daimon. Yeah, that's it, dude.
if we took that DeLorean now, what you said 2030. So if we took the DeLorean to 2030 and we get out and everything goes Brian's way and we meet you there, what's he going to tell us that happened?
Wow, that's a goosebumps exciting frame. A lot of my work right now is the very practical nuts and bolts of our public benefit corporation. So I'm obsessed right now on just material measures of our impact. So one of the things that we do, as you know, is we train coaches. So we've had 10,000 people go through our coach program from 100 countries. So in 2030, we will have 100,000 coaches performing at an incredibly high level. Training on average at least 100 people each. So that's 10 million people directly impacted by the heroic protocol. And our commitment this year to hit that, by the way, is glaringly better. The absolute best coach certification and training program in the world. We're already very good at one aspect of it. We're getting better at a couple of other aspects. But then, I see we do a lot of work. We're starting to do more work with the military, which I think is fundamental. Our flourishing is dependent on the freedoms that we take for granted, but those are protected by men and women and their families that I'm blessed and we're blessed to serve now. And I want to serve every single cadet to vet is kind of our vision in the heroic military world. We do work with corporations. I want to serve literally one of the companies I admire Accenture serves 90 out of 100 of the biggest companies in the US. I want to do the same thing, using the heroic platform, which we already do, to help their team members and families optimize their energy, work, and love. I want every single one of those major corporations using heroic. That's corporate. We're doing stuff in the educational space. I see schools adopting the heroic platform and methodology, some of which are already doing that. And then we also do work in the sports world. We work with teams and teams behind the teams. I want their fan base connecting to their heroes on heroic. Those are some of the things, but moving forward toward that measurable sense of flourishing in a very tactical way. And there's a ton of other, details behind that, but that's kind of the high level, what fires me up. How about you? Give me your 2030. I know you got a big, big, big vision, and we've got some, well, I'll let you frame it up.
Well, the Archangel Summit events that we do now, I want to grow them into big theaters and arenas. And by 2030, I want to do an arena tour of the world. So in the same way Beyonce or Taylor Swift tours, but I think the better analogy is Cirque du Soleil. So if you've ever been to one of their shows, they're my favorite. What they did to elevate the circus experience by bringing in almost like a Broadway feel, like theatrics, and a show quality, is what we're doing with our events for personal transformation and business growth. And we're going to create shows. So I'm now using the word show instead of conference, or, we're elevating the experience. And there is a show component, and we're going to tour these shows. So the one in Toronto that you're speaking at is called Unleashed. We're going to tour Unleashed, and we'll have more shows, and they're always going to be connected to a film that plays throughout the experience too. So, the idea is have 1 million people attend our shows by 2030.
Dude, that's so cool.
Thank you. Love it. So I am insanely grateful for you. I can't wait for you to, I'll see you before September, I have a feeling, but September in Toronto for September 21st for Archangel Summit Unleashed. And thank you for spending the time today. And thank you for everyone who joined live. We'll be doing one of these every month with one of our speakers from Summit. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone here, and see you all very soon.
Bless you, brother. Appreciate you. Looking great in that t-shirt too, by the way.
Thank you. See you. Bye, everybody.